Hi, hello, hello. We are starting off a big flood of list videos with a pretty straightforward one, which is my top 10 albums of 2019. I think normally we've done top 15 for album lists, but since I'm doing the albums of the decade list as well, I don't know, it just seemed unnecessary. Okay, so the first one we'll talk about at number 15 is Freddie Gibbs and Madlib's Bandana. Pretty cool album art. You can see here a broken pinata, which is of course in reference to their previous album. And I gotta say, the highest praise I can possibly give this is that finally, at long last, it's more pinata. Not surprising that making something this good isn't so quick or easy. Pinata came out in 2014, so it took 5 years for the follow-up, after many announcements and false starts and delays and a few singles trickling out here and there. We finally have another album's worth of the unique magic of Freddie Gibbs and Madlib. Madlib's crate digging, that is going through old record shops where the records are just put into those milk crates and lined up for miles and miles, digging through those, finding groove records and soul records and all this other stuff that nobody else would think to look at, and then extracting samples from them to build up your musical texture and your aesthetic. This is a skill that a lot of hip hop producers have in their arsenal. It's a way that a lot of producers go about making music. But Madlib's skill in this, at least since the untimely passing of Jay Dilla, is second to none. Madlib is just an absolute virtuoso artist at the art of extracting from the deepest cuts. The atmosphere that he builds up with this is so hypnotic, so deep, and yet so evocative. You find yourself both spaced out, just going along for the ride, and yet your mind is flooded with scenes and images and ideas, resulting from these kind of ghosts of music past. These huge cinematic transitions that he's able to make, it gives me a feeling of like disgust. Sometimes when the beat changes, or it's a transition from song to song, or just some sample comes in at just the right time, the only face you can make is like, ugh, like you feel like you've eaten something so pungent and strong. Like if you watch the cheese video I made, it feels like eating that really old cheddar that it fills your whole body so quickly before you can have any sort of intellectual reaction. You're just like, oh, it's such a good beat. Oh, what a good transition. Nobody does it like this. And Madlib has been quite selective in the rappers that he'll produce for. There's not many rappers that can live up to this level of passion, dedication, this meticulousness and craft in making beats. MF Doom, of course, probably his most legendary collaborator, putting out the album Madvillainy, which is just an all-time classic. But Freddie Gibbs certainly holds his own in this category too. Uh, every single flow that he gives on this album is so refined. Like it feels like it's so meticulously crafted, word by word, bar by bar, but still so empowered too. That he doesn't feel too intellectual. He doesn't feel like some sort of ivory tower scholar rapper or whatever. It's all coming entirely from his life, from his own personal voice, fully empowered by the emotional space that he was writing in. It just so happens that the way he expresses himself is with this level of complexity, is with this level of genius on each and every idea. Every single line that he gives you is so impactful and meaningful. Like, there aren't filler bars on this. There aren't just kind of, well, the beat is good and this flow is good, so let's get enough words out there to fill up the song. But everything feels like it's telling a story. Every image feels fresh. It all contributes something meaningful. And this, I think, is where the real level up from Pinata happens. Don't get me wrong, Pinata was full of bangers too, and really gave us a pretty compelling portrait of Freddie. But it wasn't so, I don't know, personal. It didn't feel so connected to a full and complete human being. It was more kind of like a persona, it felt like. So this extra level of exposure and I think kind of an emotional maturity that reflects on this one is a significant level up and something that I'm really excited to see in future albums. Freddie go even further in this direction, even further in exposing the fullness of himself and being a complete human being expressed through his raps. And when I talk about future albums, basically, if we got another album like this in 2024, if we had to wait another 5 years, that'd be fine. That'd be fine. I could listen to this for 5 years, just like I listened to Pinata for 5 years, and happily await whatever their next project will be. Yeah, check this one out. Some recommended tracks. Cataracts, absolutely huge banger. It gives you a perfect example of that major cinematic flow switch with probably my favorite like mid-song beat transition on the entire album. And Giannis, which features Anderson .Paak, really expertly utilized on this track, really bringing his strengths and still feeling very much a part of the world that Madlib and Freddie are building up. Okay, next one I want to talk about is Igor by Tyler, the Creator. Again, I love this album art. It kind of looks like maybe lobotomy type thing suggested. You know, Igor, Frankenstein mythos, it all seems to swirl around. And yeah, just the kind of shoddiness of the way his portrait is cut out for this. And I didn't even notice this. It actually says Igor. What? I never noticed that. Yeah, good stuff. So this is another explosive metamorphosis from Tyler. Tyler, whom you may have even forgotten, started off as kind of like a shocking rapper who wanted to say outrageous things and toe the line of good taste. You'd be forgiven if you had forgotten, just given how much he's reinvented himself over his last few albums. And as I say, this is yet another explosion. This is yet another cocoon that he has just burst from. There's this persona of Igor that he's built up through music videos and through the kind of aesthetics of the album, and then expressed on some of the tracks. That's very, very haunting to me. It's quite cryptic. It's not like there's ever any song that's like the origin story of Igor, but it still feels deeply resonant. Like you can understand that this is talking about a part of Tyler that might be a part of all of us as well. And just when we hear certain lines, it kind of twinges some dark part of our brain. Oh, is that Igor lurking? And this is built up further through some cross-song narratives, some characters and personas that I think are given just the right weight. That it's not so much like a concept album. It's not that these sorts of stories are beaten over your head while you're listening to it. But it's still compelling to explore these arcs, to look at the lyrics and try to find these pathways through which to understand the album. To me, something that's too conceptual, that's too story-based, can sometimes feel a little cheesy and maybe it gets old quicker, and often it requires some exposition that sort of takes you out of the flow of the songs. But here, I think, as I said, it's just given the right amount of weight. It's there for you, but it's not dragging you along. And a great sense of all of this powering through Tyler's most sonically amazing work yet. Like, my gosh. Am I impressed with how this album sounds on the most visceral sonic level? There's some abrasiveness, some really kind of drony, heavy synth work, but it's perfectly balanced with Tyler's super powered pop sensibilities for things like structure, melody, just straight up catchiness. Tyler has gotten so almost unnervingly good at just writing pop music. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that if he wanted to stop being a rapper, stop being a musician himself, and just be a songwriter for the biggest pop stars of our generation, he could make bank. He could make such bank putting out songs for other people, but you know, only Tyler is going to do it quite like this. And I think, yeah, hearing these very bold experiments in the texture of the music, but still having them presented to you in such a familiar, welcoming pop structure, is a really powerful combination. It makes it so listenable, and yet there's so many aspects of it that really hook you, really catch you, and kind of emotionally wrench you. And special shoutouts to the Playboy Cardi verse. I think it's so beautiful on Earthquake. Probably my favorite part of the whole album. Something that at the time seemed like very quirky, kind of like a novelty. Something to just make Playboy Cardi and this verse stand out among many other rappers, many other verses. But I think few people will disagree, has become somewhat of a classic, somewhat of a watershed moment in the evolution of hip hop going into this next decade. If you look at someone like A45AR, we're going to go so extreme in this direction that this is going to be not even weird, but just like a forebearer, a prophecy. So some recommended tracks: Earthquake, Omega Banger, you've probably heard it before, and Puppet, I think, is a deeper cut on the album that really highlights just a lot of the quirkiness that Tyler still infuses all of his songs with, even when they reach such gigantic pop heights. Yeah. Next, we're going to talk about YBN Corday's The Lost Boy. Very lovely album art. I like this kind of burn technique in watercolors where it kind of looks like something is being seared out of the image. It's really neat. Really neat. All right. So where are we going to go on this one? This is perhaps the next generation of the Kanye into Chance legacy, a Chicago rapper with all sorts of ambition and kind of an inclination to storytell and to rap in a particular way. It has all of the storytelling, all of that endearing personality, the uplifting sweetness that we look to in Kanye's early albums and Chance's career. Not Chance's latest album, but don't worry about that. But there's also this kind of SoundCloud era dynamicism of his flow, that he's not going to be content just rapping in the ways that Kanye and Chance did, just in the way that Chance wasn't content rapping the way that Kanye did. That he had all sorts of like the kind of scat type stuff that I can't do it very well. The thing that Chance is always doing. In the same way, YBN Cordae is like touching into the most cutting edge music of hip hop in this generation, and achieving all of these kind of songwriting goals, but still allowing himself to use this full palette of rap. And what it results in is some like really modern, exciting seeming flows, but with the lyrical content of much more like kind of classic understandings of hip hop. And he attempts quite admirably on his debut album all of the gigantic album feelings that Kanye and Chance have. So it has the bangers, it has the sad bangers, it has the pop gang bangers, it has the big guest suite of big names that spice up each and every track. Well, not every track, but a lot of tracks. There's little tracks of people singing, people close to him in his life probably. And then, of course, the big sentimental finish where on the final track he just kind of spills his guts and talks about everything happening in his life and all of his ambitions and how wonderful it is to make it this far. He studied the playbook well, and I think the vast majority of the time he succeeds with these ambitions with flying colors. And even when there's like a stumble, even when some line doesn't really hit you the way you know that he wanted you to, or some transition feels a little deflated compared to the peaks of Chance or Kanye or whatever, it's with an endearing amateurishness where you know that he's still trying his best. He's still putting himself out there so much, and he's still aiming for such great heights. Like he's not content to just make a mixtape feel of here are some tracks that I have finished, but I am making an album. That's so admirable. That's so exciting. The potential that you hear from this, of his future albums kind of infusing themselves in the mistakes you know he won't make twice, is so compelling, so exciting too. I can't wait to see where he is an album from now, 2 albums from now, when he makes his My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, right? Like the potential is there. The potential is there. And the most important part to me is that everything he's saying, everything he raps about is so heartfelt, so genuinely touching. There's no pretense, there's no stunting, trying to come up with some persona that really isn't him. But just really wanting to express his true life, who he truly has been this entire time, in such a profoundly large way. So, some recommended tracks. Have Mercy was one of the big singles. There's a pretty awesome music video by it, done by Lyrical Lemonade, Cole Bennett, that guy. And Way Back Home, which I think has like a nice blend of the sentimentality that we love from these sorts of rappers, with some of the kind of more dynamicism that we are so excited about in the next generation. Okay. Next, we have Anima by Thom Yorke, Thommy Thom. This album cover, again, I never noticed. This is actually like a cityscape. Can you see that it's a bunch of sky rises and stuff? Skyscrapers? I think that's what's going on here. It's kind of blurry. And then this is someone, maybe Tom himself, plunging into it. Kind of grim, but you know, that's what we expect. So this is another entry in this spontaneous overflow of synth power series. I described Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, his previous solo album, as seeming to result from his recent acquisition of maybe specific old analog synthesizers, or his revelations and being able to make a specific sort of synth sound, and then this just kind of spontaneous desire to make some tracks in that mode. That everything seems to be motivated by the ability to make a particular kind of aesthetic and sound, and not so much about having like a particular song structure in mind. It's kind of hard to describe an album like this because so much of it is based on that sheer sonic bliss, that particular sound that he's aiming for. But it still really has that uniquely Radiohead combination of like tension and resolution. And this is kind of hard to describe as well. But I find that it's one of the few consistent threads through Radiohead's entire discography, or at least the parts of it that are most memorable to me, is that a lot of the songwriting both feels unresolved, while other aspects of it feel kind of complete and comforting in some regard. So you'll have like one melody that's kind of reaching into like a minor area with all these chords that feel like they need to go back down to like a major and kind of like resolve this buildup of kind of a creepy feeling. But then underneath these other synth lines maybe are just soothing and kind of pulling you into this contentment where just simultaneously your brain is in both of these states, such that the message seems to be like anxiety is the default state of the world, which doesn't sound like pleasant music. But you know, for like 17 years now, I've been listening to Radiohead since around when Hail to the Thief came out, and for 17 years I have been deeply entranced by that feeling. I'm not sure if this is a recommendation to have this experience yourself, but when you hear new music that gives you a feeling that's so nostalgic and such a part of your tastes and your kind of way of thinking, even, it's deeply profound. It's like nothing else. So this is some of his more ambitious solo songwriting. Like I kind of made a joke earlier that it's like, oh, he just wants to noodle around on some synths, and this is just his default songwriting mode. But he goes pretty hard on here. There's some tracks that are like kind of big sweeps with pretty mind-blowing like cinematic transitions. We talked about, I keep using this word cinematic to talk about like transitions in songs and stuff. And I will refuse to explain what I mean right now, except that, you know, it's like watching a movie, you know? And normally in situations where I feel like Tom is normally content to just kind of loop something, to go into kind of a holding pattern and just let your mind sink into the singular sound. Now he seems a lot more ambitious, that he wants to make twists, he wants to mix things up, he wants to go into brand new modes, and offset that kind of expectation and that level of comfort. And these are interspersed with as I said, kind of the more singular explorations where it's more about kind of one sound, one focus. And this provides a really nice arc to the entire album, this going back and forth with these big centerpiece tracks. And at last, we get to hear this legendary song, Dawn Chorus, which has been kind of a rumored Radiohead song since way back 2001, I think. I think it was one of the tracks that they discussed recording for Amnesiac. I'm sure it's gone through thousands of iterations since then. For all I know, Tom has completely forgotten that there was another song called Dawn Chorus, and made a new song called Dawn Chorus, which is what happened with the song Judge, Jury, and Executioner off Amok. He had forgotten that that was already the subtitle to a song on Hail to the Thief. Whatever. So I don't really know to what extent this is the same Dawn Chorus, but there's been a few of these tracks lately in Radiohead's discography that are like beyond the grave. Like it's something that they had recorded years and years ago, or even decades ago, that's finally emerging when we kind of had given up on it. And something about that reputation, something about the heaviness around its very existence, I find just so haunting, and the music itself is so beautiful too on Dawn Chorus. I thought I had another point about that, but I don't know how they just keep nailing it again and again, that they live up to the reputations these songs have generated. So the lyrics are in your typical kind of Tom York mode, gloomy, pessimistic, turning a skeptical eye to society, but they still feel fresh, mostly in how they've evolved. That in areas where once he was anxious, now he is resigned. In areas where he confronted death, now he realizes instead the endless mundanity of life. It does feel like still an ongoing dialogue between Tom and the listeners, one where he's not just kind of repeating himself, but generally contemplating his past emotions and growing from them, albeit perhaps in an even more depressed direction. Like 17 years now, I've been depressed listening to these lyrics. Maybe. But hey, check it out. I recommend the tracks Twist. This is one of the more big, sweet songs with some awesome, well, twists in them and this beautiful development of like kind of the final melody. And then Dawn Chorus, which appears directly after and is so minimal in comparison and is just, oh boy, it just feels like you're giving up in some major essential way. It's beautiful. Okay, next we'll talk about this Magdalene. How do you say it? How do you pronounce it? Magdalene? Magdalene? I don't think I've ever tried to say it out loud before right now. Like Mary Magdalene. Yeah, so I think it's Magdalene, because that sounds right. This is the latest album by FKA Twigs. Yet again, there's something I noticed in the album art for the first time just now, which is somewhat embarrassing, which is that her hair turns into a little snake. It's so cute. But yeah, it's the kind of album cover you would expect from her. A little off-putting, a little creepy, and yet still so beautiful, so undeniably artistically beautiful. And that's what I'd say about her music too. So I think this is a photo of her standing in front of a campus, and then she herself has been painted on, perhaps digitally. Well, for the eyes, definitely digitally. But is it actually like her body? I don't know. Anyways, so this got a lot of hype. It was getting really good reviews. People were freaking out about the singles. I had only heard the one single before. So the first time I listened to it, I'll be completely honest here, after all this hype, it's kind of like, whatever, I was like, yeah, this is about as good as her old music. It's interesting, but it's not something that I'm going to completely freak out about. It wasn't, yeah, as I said, I was never like the absolute hugest fan of her previous work. I always thought this is cool, but never like this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. But I found that once I started listening to this more, once I started kind of learning it, anticipating parts of it, seeing the bigger picture, there's this gigantic, mesmerizing vision that just kind of opens up in your mind, where all the pieces start adding up, where all of the aesthetic modes and sort of landscapes that she wants to develop in your mind start kind of seeing their full potential. The sonic depths on this production just completely envelop you. Some of the deep synths are so beautiful in the way they just kind of rattle your heart. And every rhythm and vocal just blooms with this enchanting complexity. Nothing is ever simple. There's no vocal line where she just kind of sings it. But instead, something always throws you off just a bit. Everything is always there to just pique your interest a little more once you know to listen for it. The images both warm the heart with some really sincere passages about love, connection, understanding, and yet other parts plague your mind with these cryptic images that you can't quite imagine, but you can't quite forget either. And even with this, even with all of this complexity and weirdness, sometimes she still just goes for like a really simple, glorious pop moment where she's gonna sing her heart out over some beautiful strings and such. And she nails that too. So she really does it all on this one. It's Bjorkian. I think this is probably the highest compliment I can give. In the best way, it reminds me of Bjork. So some recommended tracks, Sad Day, early one, absolute banger. Really has this nice progressive driving force behind it. And then Cellophane, which is kind of the opposite, much more meditative, minimalist, and just really achingly beautiful. Okay, next we are going to talk about Caligula by Lingua Ignota. I'm so sorry. It doesn't matter. You can read the text and look it up on your own. So I'm doing my best. This album cover is pretty weird. I had a friend who is like, I didn't listen to this album because I thought the album cover looked stupid, and boy do I regret it. But I can understand it. It doesn't look like it's going to be a good album from the cover, I guess. I don't know what I would expect. I listened to it before I even saw the cover. So I will say, before you as well just plunge into this, this is a genuine warning right now that this album is quite terrifying. And listening to it might actually cause you to lose some mental HP. We talked about FKA Twigs and her haunting cryptic imagery, and Thom Yorke and his gloomy, depressive mood, but this is the one that gets the warning, so that should say a lot. How would I describe this? A titanic, experimental, harsh, drone, operatic, metallic, romantic, baroque, biblical, feminist, revolutionary, personal, political, universal manifesto. There's no other comparison that can capture it. It's some of the most powerful, wild, and yet still expertly virtuoso vocals I have ever heard on a recording. And this is saying a lot, because I listen to Japanese noise, and a lot of Japanese noise artists like build their whole career after giving these kind of really wild, unrestrained, powerful performances. But this just kind of feels like another tier. There's this deep, deep message of pain, of betrayal and being left alone, and sometimes quite defeated. That's expressed both on this extremely visceral level, that just when you hear her scream out, it can mean nothing else than this pain. And yet still so meaningful too, that the more you think about the lyrics, the more you look at the homages and motifs used from, there's like the funeral of Queen Anne, the funeral march of Queen Anne is sampled. Sampled doesn't sound like the right word. Is used on one of these tracks. Things like that just contribute to this really kind of deep modernist source of meaning, where there's so much intertextual connection, so many kind of operatic modes and stuff. I shouldn't say that it's just a message of pain, though. It's a message of pain and anger and triumph and retaliation, but all pretty intense emotions resulting from someone who has not been treated well. But there's these moments where that harshness gives away to just sheer overwhelming beauty, where there is no screaming, there are no metal riffs, there are no double kick bass lines or gigantic droning synths, but just enchanting little piano melodies and small string sections. And these, not just in the anticipation that the noise will return, but on their own, somehow feel even more obliterating, feel even more just mind destroying. And it's really hard to explain why, but it vaguely reminds me of a long discussion in Infinite Jest about the painfulness in this movie of hearing a plucked string that's producing this nauseating pure tone, and then how after that, when they silence it, it's like even worse, which I always found very interesting. It's like a metaphor for depression, but everything in Infinite Jest is a metaphor for depression. Anyways, yeah, wow, what an album. Check it out, but honestly, be careful. Like, listen to it in a good state of mind, or else it will just kick the shit out of you. So recommended tracks. You can get a sense for what the album is like, perhaps just from these titles. Do You Doubt Me, Traitor? I'd say probably the centerpiece of the album, just a huge odyssey of rage and revenge. And May Failure Be Your Noose, which is more of this almost nauseating beauty, and the lyrics are uh, almost like hilarious in just how spiteful and poisonous they are. It's interesting because you find yourself both terrified of her and then deeply rooting for her. That you want her to win, even if that comes at your own destruction. Ooh, what an album. Okay, it only gets crazier from here though. I'm gonna talk about 100 gecs and their album 1000 gecs. I think this album cover is fantastic, and I cannot tell you why at all. Except that I saw a YouTube comment that was like, "What if we kissed in the 1000 gecs tree?" uh, yeah. So here's another genuine warning. This album is so zoomerific, it might really cause you to lose some mental HP. It's really hard to describe what this music is like. I saw a tweet. I can't find it again. It's really gonna bug me. That was the tweet said, 100 gecs is what a person in 2006 would reasonably conclude that music in 2019 should sound like. This is so hilariously accurate. I really wish I could figure out who tweeted this originally and give them some kudos. Shoutouts to that person, yeah. If anyone can find this tweet, I didn't put in a huge amount of effort, I'll be honest. But yeah, let me know. Because credit where credit is due. This is such an apt description. And if you're the type of person that reads this description and is like, hell yeah, I want to listen to that, go out and listen to it. Hell yeah. So again, it's hard to describe this without just shoving a bunch of words in your face, but it's an explosive mix of mall emo, screamo, bro step, happy hardcore, MySpace rave, ringtone rap, and 500 other dead micro genres. Plus, there's even like micro genres, like Orange Milk Core. If you've ever listened to the record label Orange Milk, I feel like that was maybe an influence on these guys with some of the really weird samples and kind of ironic synth use, I would almost say. Big Truck Wave, which is the legendary overlap between truckers and EDM, and non-meme Pisscore. Y'all remember Pisscore? I loved Pisscore. Oh, that's my neighbors. I thought they were knocking on my door. But Pisscore was very, very much entrenched in memes. It was a meme-based genre, and this has all of the stylistic. Is that my door? I don't want to go check the door if they're knocking on my neighbor's door. Sounds awkward. I guess. Oh, hold on. No, I think it must be my neighbor's door. Some thrilling video making. The meta suspense. But yeah, it's like they took all of the stylistic insanity of Piscore, all of the willingness to go so far in the meme direction, but made it entirely their own sonic landscape. Like for all of the nostalgia and all of this irreverence on the album, it's not memey. There's no like direct pointing to something else. It's all them. It's all new. There's even brand new genres on here. Like whatever the hell Stupid Horse is. Have you ever heard another song like that? In terms of the theme, in terms of the aesthetics, in terms of just how it's structured and put together? If you have, let me know because I want to hear more like it. Until then, it's a 100 gecs exclusive. And and here's the thing that blows my mind is that after all of this insanity, sometimes, if you're listening to it in the right mood, some of the lyrics, which at first seem so kind of ironic, like they're mocking this sort of sentimentality, the true sentimentality of just those lyrics taken literally will hit you so hard that you hear them sing about, I said I love you on the plane, he said I love you too. Oh, oh. Nothing's changed. I still need you. And then, of course, it like destroys that entire kind of nice, caring, calming mood that it built up. It just annihilates it itself, but that kind of touchingness still lingers with you. Yeah. Oh, lovely, lovely album. Or maybe I'm just insane. I don't know. This is an experience that anyone else I know that's listened to this album has not shared, at least to the extent that I have. But maybe you will. Maybe you'll be the type that will cry listening to 100 gecs as well. So some recommended tracks. Stupid Horse, as I said before, is just bonkers. 100 decibel cloud, 800 decibel cloud has those lyrics that I was just quoting a second ago. So it has that nice sentimental moment. And then by the end, there's like death metal growls. So gives you a nice little sample of the range. Okay, we're heading into the top three with Richard Dawson's 2020, a really haunting album cover. It's kind of the opposite of the Anima one, where at first you look at it and you think it's just a mess, but then you realize it's buildings. Here, when I first looked at this, I thought this was buildings. I thought this was like a cityscape being drawn out. And maybe it is in some crazy MC Escher mode, but like the more you look at it, the less sense it makes. And then there's this X. What does it mean? Why is it slightly off center? Why is there one little drip of paint outside of it? Haunting. Haunting TBH. Okay. So this is a follow-up to Peasant, which came out in 2017. He took the perspective of just various medieval peasantry. Will we see a third part set in the future? You know, Peasant, we looked at the lives of peasants. 2020, we look at the life of people today in the same area of England. Will we jump now another 300, 400 years ahead? That would probably be the album of the year every year. My God, would that be cool? Don't you want to hear that? Ooh, with track titles like like Robot Inspector, Content Farmer. I don't know. So these are slices of life that feel completely believable. In fact, they're quite inevitable. There's such a simplicity to them, such commonplace stories that it seems inevitable that all of these people must really exist. That there are actually people aptly described by these lyrics that have had the situations told in these stories. You would be surprised if there wasn't. Some are bittersweet. There's these moments of kindness, serendipity, that emerge amongst harsh conditions and kind of a life of struggle. But these bittersweet moments are often just there to contrast. Well, not just there to contrast. That's unfair, but they do a really good job in contrasting other songs which are just overwhelmingly brutal and sad. And what this creates is this powerful feeling of like all the same world, all the same time. This was something that I used to be quite occupied with in my writing, was just this kind of mind-blowing realization that you can have sometimes of the fact that any two events you can think of, any two lives being led, any two news stories, they're all really happening at the same time. They're all really happening on the same world. And I think having a story that is kind of compellingly bittersweet, where you kind of have mixed emotions about it, those often feel the most real. Those often feel the most kind of believable in your mind, that you can actually kind of picture them happening out there. And then when you realize that just as real as, the story of a man who saw a UFO one day and then obsessed over it, and his marriage and his relationship with his daughter, and it has all this complexity, is just as real as the story of a man who's homeless and lying on the street and some strangers come up and kick him and beat him. That's just as real. That's also happening. And no matter how on the nose it seems, no matter how like, oh, well, come on, you know that this is all really happening to people, that these are stories that are, again, like inevitably true. So you can never really turn away. The songwriting, in order to facilitate these character sketches, is completely immersive and literary. And what I mean by that is that it mostly is kind of describing scenes, describing characters' feelings around those scenes. Like they don't really feel like lyrics as much as sort of excerpts from monologues by these supposed characters. It feels like you're reading kind of their diary or whatever, and it gives such an authentic sense of voice and character that it doesn't feel like they're compromising any of their idiosyncrasies. These characters, this is not just Richard Dawson, but these characters that he's creating, still feel fully realized, not compromising for the sake of being like a song. It's so conversational. Again, it really seems to reflect how people actually speak and think, but richly descriptive too, in a way that isn't unnatural. It's the ideal of like a diary type mode. This is what I look to in things like Nosgard or Sun Kill Moon. This blend of the evocative but the natural. Sometimes the lyrics, to facilitate this, are so packed that when you look at them on paper, you're like, this can't possibly be sung. This is going to be so clunky to try to actually articulate to a melody. But Richard, oh boy, his beautiful, unstoppable, overpowering atom bomb of a voice can carry everything through with such dramatic flair, that it still kind of seems unnatural to be singing the words he's singing, but he pulls it off. He just makes it work. And all of this is matched by really dynamic instrumentation. And every track has something that just wows you, something a little noisy, a little abrasive, or something unexpectedly beautiful and kind of transcendent. I think every single track has some moment where you're just kind of taken aback, and realize just how immersed you are in that song. The songs are really expertly structured too, I think, that these instrumental elements are really developed and highlighted throughout the song, but they never overwhelm the message of the song. The focus is still on what Richard is singing and the character he's bringing to life. It's a great feeling of like technology on many of these tracks, like robot voices and synthesizer work and some of the more noisy things. And this, I think, contrasts really nicely with the folksiness of Peasant. The Peasant is almost all acoustic, kind of traditional type instruments, and although it is still quite abrasive and discordant at times, it never ventures into this new terrifying world of computer music. Makes me again very excited about the prospect of the third installment set in the future and what the heck that could sound like. But in the end, I think, for all of the really dynamic, explosive experience of actually listening to this music, what really makes it so special is the way it stays with you afterwards, the way it stays with you when you're not listening to it. Some lines, since I've heard this, have just been repeating in my head, for better or worse, in inspirational moments and moments of resignation and defeat. The one right now is, there's more. There has to be, which is sung right near the end of the track, Fulfillment Center. But each and every line on this album, I think, has that potential. that if you hear it in the right mood, if it evokes an image in your mind at the right time, it'll be with you for months. For better or worse, it'll be with you for months. So some recommended tracks: Jogging. This is the first thing I ever heard by Richard Dawson. A friend of mine linked it to me. They said he thought I might like it. I did indeed. It has a fantastic music video as well, and gives you, I think, a really good example of this sort of character writing and storytelling. Fulfillment Center is the one where this line comes from. It's probably my favorite at the moment. It has some of these more bold, kind of weird, abrasive elements, but then these moments of just total sadness, sorrow, deeply resonantly human. Okay, let's move on to something a little more fun. At number 2, we have Angel's Pulse by Blood Orange. A whole lot going on in this album cover. I'm sure there's like 50 things I hadn't noticed before. One thing I had noticed though, he's using uTorrent. Check it out! Haha! A fellow citizen of the high seas, someone whose musical taste cannot be bound by Spotify, Apple Music, Google Music, whatever, but someone who craves hearing it all and knows that Redacted is the only place that you'll find it. So, this is some of my, so I would say, how do I put this? Well, I guess I put it like this. There's moments in some songs that are like impossibly good. And this sounds like a dumb thing to say, but sometimes you hear it and you're like, that can't be real. I can't really be hearing this right now. There's some development, some shift, something, and your brain just can't seem to process it correctly. When you hear it every time, yeah, it feels like there's some short circuiting. It can't possibly sound as good as it does. And as soon as it passes, you can never really recall how it really worked. You can't play it again in your head. There's some key element that's just gone as quickly as it came. And most albums, I think, will have a few seconds like this. These are highlights of the whole experience, the things that really stick with you on those albums. But Blood Orange, genius that he is, somehow just soaks this entire album in this feeling, where everything has this implacable quality to it. Everything feels gone as soon as you hear it. How do you make an album this good? For real though, like when I try to break down any given second of it, like sonically, it's just too much. It's there's always something kind of lurking beyond where you can see, and when you kind of shift over to look at like, well, how is he making that song, that sound? It feels like 5 or 6 other things kind of drop out of your vision. It's unreal. It's impossible. So let's look at a list of things that had to go right for this album to work. Like all of the miracles that had to line up for this to sound as good as it does. Every really, really smooth vocal line where he's singing just like velvet butter actually has to sound that smooth. If it's any less smooth than that, it'll sound so cheesy, it'll sound so cloying and kind of try hard. Every cool sounding lyric, every just really witty yet evocative yet artistically poetic lines had to hit this amazing sweet spot where they're all of those things and yet not corny, not overdone, not try hard. How? How do you write lyrics like that? All of the synths, whenever they're kind of throwbacky, whenever they want to evoke the 80s, something kind of retro, all of these samples that weave genre histories together and are homages to things diverse as like Memphis rap to, as I said, kind of like cheesy 80s power pop stuff. They actually had to be like classic. They actually had to bring about that entire history in your mind so that you can rapidly contextualize them and appreciate them fully and not just kind of seem out of date and cheesy. How? All of these major transitions across the album, the whole thing has this amazing flow to it while also being incredibly diverse in the genres and modes that it covers. it had to keep that same energy. You never have a moment where you're taken out of the music, where your kind of groove that you're getting into is diminished or cut off. Um, but it still has to have that feeling of transition. It still has to feel like it's blooming into something brand new, that it's shocking you with some new development. How do you do that? How do you shock and yet not displace? How do you? I don't know. There's an amazing roster of guests as diverse as Project Pat, Arca, Benny Revival, who's like a kind of a cult hero in the hip hop world. The friend of mine that got me into this album was also huge into him. Imagine being a fan of someone who makes hundreds of cryptic SoundCloud accounts with like one song posted each and uploads these mysterious videos of themselves in full Halloween regalia, along with gigantic all caps rants that skew between crazy and profoundly sensible, who has this tiny little cult following, and then suddenly be brought onto the stage of this album in a way that is so appreciative of his unique talents, of his gift and his vision, while still keeping that same energy. Like, what? Is Dev Hynes Blood Orange literally just the biggest genius on earth? And talking about the actual emotional mode of this album, there's these moments of remembrance, of loss. They have to hit just as hard as ones of triumph and celebration, while again keeping that same energy. How? But yeah, there's tracks on here that make me want to cry if I really think about what they're saying and what they mean. And then other ones that make me super pumped, that like I could go out and run a marathon. Both with the same energy. He did it all though. It's a miraculously wonderful experience. I come back to this album again and again in all sorts of moods and all sorts of times, and every time I just find myself engrossed, truly engrossed. Oh yeah, I actually made specific reference to this, I guess. Oops. Yeah. Here's a touring client open on the album cover. That makes me happy. That makes me feel like we're actually pretty connected, me and Dev Hynes, in some real weird way. So recommended tracks. Just listen to the whole thing. It's only like it's less than 40 minutes long. I think. I think it's like 35 minutes or so. So come on, just listen to the whole thing. The whole experience is so smooth, so wonderfully put together. I can't recommend just a few tracks. Okay, now we'll move on to the number one, which to me it's pretty shocking that this isn't number one. But I couldn't, in good conscience, actually let this one lose out to anything this year. And that is UFOF by Big Thief. It's a nice album cover. Looks like maybe the 100 Gex crew is standing over here. Same park, same world, same place, same time. But yeah, speaking of the album cover, like when I saw this was getting really good reviews and showing up on lists and stuff, I looked at these album cover and I was like, come on, what is this heavy shit? Really though. And when I listened to it, it was exactly what I was expecting. Really, like it was the exact same sound that I pictured when I was looking at that album cover. You know, folksy acoustic music, gentle singing, strumming. It's exactly the sort of music you'd play on an old blanket out in a grassy field somewhere. You brought some weed, some wine, you know, hippie shit. And all of this is really nicely performed, an enchanting expertise. Elements like the drumming were much more surprising. Like I never realized how essential good, precise rhythm in this sort of folksy music is. But it really gives it a wonderful energy, and again, just performed so well. If you focus on any given instrument, you're gonna be wowed. Like the technical craft in performing this is just unbelievable. Even though it's so simple, even though it's so folksy, you can't underestimate just how skilled these musicians are. Or, you know, don't focus on anything. Don't worry about how well they're playing. Just float along to the whole experience. And all of this is interjected. And this is, I think, what kind of surprised me about the album and what really made me start liking it is that there's these kind of odd moments and the contrast between them and the more what you expect hippie shit just drills right into your brain. It's sudden, it's so memorable, so quickly, so evocative, so um, sometimes like unpleasant, but despite all of that, there's nothing that deviates from kind of the mode of its composition, from this imagery of them just kind of playing together. That it never detracts from the atmosphere that the entire album builds up. It never takes you out of that place, even though it can grip you so quickly. Uh, oh, 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 oh. And this atmosphere, I think, creates a real timelessness to the album. That you're taken away to a different place, a different time. It feels very fresh still, though, too. So how do you reconcile those things? The way it feels to me is that it's not new, but it's fresh. Like somehow in some parallel timeline, this album was made in the 1960s by some forgotten rival to Joan Jett or what's her face? You know, one pill makes you larger and the other makes you small. And the pills that what? Who is that? Who is that? Janis Joplin. It's like some parallel to them. It's some forgotten rival to the wonderfully talented folk singers of that era. I guess they were a little later. That was more 70s. Whatever. um, it feels like it just kind of fell out of this alternate timeline that we could have been listening to this entire time. The lyrical themes range from really delightful, sentimental, somber, to really haunting, tragic, but then in a way that doesn't feel obnoxiously juxtaposed or roller coastery, but more just kind of like the sun breaking through the clouds. It's bright again. It's really wonderful. Yeah, it feels like you're having a deep commotional conversation. That when you talk to an old friend, you're catching up on each other's lives, you're telling stories, you're reminiscing. It has the same kind of smooth emotional flow to it that you go all over the map. You completely see the contents of their mind. And all of this is delivered with Adrienne Lenker's enthralling and truly peerless vocals. I think in the sort of style that she's going for, in what she's hoping to achieve with her singing, no one has gone further. I get flashbacks to all of my favorite things about CocoRosie. If you guys remember CocoRosie, they were kind of a freak folk, I guess you would say, type band from most of their stuff I think was from the early mid to late 2000s, I guess, into the early 2010s. And my favorite part about CocoRosie was just the vocals of them, which at times I think overlap with Adrienne's, and just this kind of weird sentimentality to something I had almost forgotten. It was so evocative when I heard her sing. And I really can't get over just how beautiful this album is, how much it enchanted me, and how much it stuck with me, and how often I came back to it when I really had no idea I wanted an album like this right now. I had no idea. I wouldn't have said, "Oh, I want to listen to a nice folk album." I wouldn't have said I want to listen to some hippie shit. I want to listen to stuff like Blood Orange. I want to listen to Richard Dawson and get all depressed. I want to listen to really crazy synthesizer music. I had no idea that part of me was obviously longing for this. That part of me was perhaps aching, and this was the only remedy. But oh man, just when I started listening to it, I was like, oh yeah, it's this. And then I was like, oh yeah, oh, it's this. Oh, so beautiful, so good. Oh my gosh. I listened to their other album this year, Two Hands. I thought it was fine. And I went back and listened to, I think it's called Masterpiece, their earlier album. And both of those are really well liked as well. But I couldn't get into them so much. Something about this one was just very, very special to me. Just maybe a right time, right place sort of thing. And it distilled the nostalgia for that moment instantly within myself that this one will probably always be special to me. So some recommended songs. The title track, UFOF, has some of the weirdness in it, some kind of uh, I don't know, almost a little goofy at times. So the UFOF stands for Unidentified Flying Object Friend. And I think something about the entire attitude that can be summarized by that comes across in that song. And then the contrast, I also recommend the song From, which is much more haunting. The lyrics are actually quite horrifying if you listen to them, but is still so beautifully performed, so achingly beautiful that you can kind of get caught up in it with this sort of unnerving feeling, not really recognizing what the song is actually about, which is quite a powerful experience. Just kind of exploring it and learning from it. Yeah, all right, that's it. 12 albums. No, what? 10 albums? I think it's because I looked at slide 24 and I was like 12 albums. Oh boy, this is the first list video too. I'm planning on making like 15 list videos, so we'll see. Maybe my sanity will just keep dwindling. But yeah, check them out. Let me know. What did you think? Are there albums based on this that I would have liked that don't appear? Maybe I didn't know about them. Maybe I forgot to listen to them. Let me know. Let me know. Next will probably be 2019 anime, and then we will tackle the decade. Yeah. All right. Bye.